Have you ever paused mid-sentence and found yourself really wondering about the hidden life of the words tumbling from your lips? It's truly astonishing how many stories, how much history are packed into the sounds we make every single day without even realizing it.
It's an incredible thought, isn't it? Every word is like a miniature archaeological site. If you dig just a little, you find layers of meaning, cultural shifts, and surprising twists that are often completely unexpected, offering a unique window into our past.
Absolutely, and that's precisely what we do here on the Deep Dive. We take a stack of information, your articles, your research, your notes, and we unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge. Our goal is to help you become truly well-informed, giving you those surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked, all without the information overload.
Our mission today is to embark on a truly fascinating linguistic expedition. We're deep diving into an authoritative dictionary of word histories, and our focus for this particular session is on uncovering the surprising, the humorous, and often the profound journeys of words that all begin with the letter T.
That's right. From everyday objects you barely notice to abstract concepts that shape our thinking, we're going to peel back the layers of meaning that have accumulated over centuries. This deep dive offers you a shortcut to truly understanding why we say what we say and how our language is, a living, breathing archive of human experience.
So get ready for some serious revelations because the T-files are just bursting with them.
Okay, let's start our deep dive by pulling back the curtain on some seemingly ordinary words that hold truly extraordinary tales.
Yeah.
What might appear simple on the surface often has a rich and complex past, reaching across cultures and centuries. And we're kicking things off with a word you probably use almost every single day: tab.
Tab is a stellar example of how a word can evolve from something very concrete and physical to something entirely abstract. If we go back to late Middle English, tab originally referred to a small flap or strip to be gripped or held.
Like you could almost picture it, right? A literal piece of fabric, leather, or metal that you could hold onto or pull.
Exactly. And it's possibly related to the word tag in that physical sense, very tangible.
Okay, tangible, I get that. But then, by the late 19th century, especially in American English, tab took on a completely different meaning: an account. That seems like quite a leap.
It is a leap, and that's exactly where we get those incredibly common idioms we still use today, almost without thinking, when you say you want to keep tabs on someone or something.
You mean keeping a regular check, like monitoring them, right? Like keeping a record?
Precisely. You're keeping a check on them, almost like keeping a ledger. And of course, if you pick up the tab at a restaurant...
You're paying the bill, settling the account. Simple as that.
Right. But what's truly fascinating here is that metaphorical leap you mentioned. How does a small physical object, a little flap abstractly, evolve into the concept of an account or a record or even a debt?
It really highlights how our brains create these connections, doesn't it? Taking something tangible and making it represent something as intangible as a financial record or, an ongoing status check.
It's a testament to the incredible flexibility of human language and our capacity for abstract thought. It shows our constant need to represent abstract ideas with concrete imagery.
Absolutely. And speaking of delightful and unexpected evolutions, let's talk about tabby, the striped cat.
Ah, yes, tabby. It's hard to imagine that word having any other origin now, but its story is incredibly winding and quite global.
That's the beauty of it. So tabby came to describe a type of cat because of its distinctive striped or mottled coat pattern, and that specific usage started in the late 16th century. But it definitely wasn't originally about cats at all, was it?
No, not at all. The cat's name actually came from an earlier use of the word for a kind of silk taffeta. This fabric was initially known for being striped.
Striped silk, okay.
Yes, and later it came to refer to silk with a watered finish, which gives it that wavy, striped, almost iridescent appearance. Think of a rich, luxurious material with subtle patterns.
Okay, so a cat's fur pattern is named after a type of silk. That's already pretty cool and unexpected, connecting a common domestic animal to something quite opulent. But where, then, did this silk get its name? That's where the truly surprising journey begins, I think.
This is where it gets really interesting, as the trail leads us far east. The ultimate origin of tabby for the silk is French tabis, which itself is based on Arabic alatabia.
Alatabia. What was that?
That Arabic phrase was the name of a specific quarter in Baghdad, in what is now Iraq, where this particular striped silk was manufactured and renowned.
Oh, wow, so we've literally gone from a familiar striped cat curled up on your sofa all the way back to a luxurious silk fabric and then to a specific distant manufacturing district in 16th century Baghdad. That's an incredible journey embedded in just 5 letters.
It really is.
Yeah.
And there's even a rather quaint, humorous twist to this word, too.
Oh, yeah. What's
Well,
up?
by the mid-18th century, tabby was also humorously used as a term for an elderly maiden lady, often alluding to certain cat-like characteristics.
An elderly maiden lady? Like what sort of characteristics? Independent. A bit aloof, maybe.
Perhaps. Maybe their independent nature, their tendency to be somewhat particular, or just a playful comparison to a cat's dignified but sometimes aloof demeanor. It certainly adds a layer of gentle social commentary to the word's history.
What I find truly striking here is connecting a familiar domestic animal's coat pattern to a luxurious fabric from a specific distant city, and then, surprisingly, to a quaintly humorous descriptor for a person. It's like a linguistic grand tour.
It vividly illustrates how global trade routes and the very aesthetics of luxury fabrics centuries ago directly shaped how we name a common household pet today. It's a testament to the unexpected ripple effects of cultural exchange.
Right. Okay, next up, we have a pair of words that are intimately connected, but their journey from the world of medicine to the realm of media is quite striking.
Tablet?
And tabloid.
Let's start with tablet. In Middle English, the word came from Old French tablet, which was a diminutive of Latin tabula, meaning plank, tablet, or list. In its early uses, a tablet referred to a small slab of stone or metal for an inscription.
Right, like you imagine ancient laws carved on the stone or messages etched onto clay, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or even a stiff sheet of something like card, often used for writing. Shakespeare used it this way in Cymbeline, saying, "This tablet lay upon his breast," referring to a written note or an inscribed plate.
Okay, so an inscribed slab or sheet. Then medicine gets involved.
Yes, the notion of a compressed drug or confection in the shape of a lozenge, essentially a small, easily digestible pill, dates from the late 16th century. This is where medicine truly enters the picture, giving us the tablet form we're familiar with today for medication.
So we have the small slab becoming a small compressed pill. That logical progression makes perfect sense. But then how did tabloid jump from medicine right into the newspaper business?
Yeah.
That seems like a massive leap.
Well, tabloid actually appeared in the late 19th century and was directly based on tablet. It was originally a proprietary name for a specific concentrated medicine sold in tablet form. The oid ending implies like or in the form of.
So like a tablet-like medicine.
Yeah.
Concentrated, okay.
Right. The term then quickly came to denote any small, highly concentrated item or product.
And this is the pivotal shift, right? The jump to news. In the early 20th century, tabloid was applied to a newspaper specifically because its stories were concentrated into an easily assimilable form, just like that concentrated medicine.
Exactly. It wasn't necessarily about the physical size of the paper initially, though they often were smaller, but the conciseness of its content. Easily digestible news.
What's truly fascinating here is how the very format of news delivery today, often short, concise, and quickly digestible chunks of information, is tied back to the concept of a small, easily consumed pill.
It highlights our enduring human desire for efficiency and, well, instant gratification in consumption, whether it's medicine for the body or information for the mind. This metaphorical link shows how deeply ingrained the concept of quick fixes or rapid delivery has become.
It's a brilliant connection, isn't it? Our news is quite literally designed to be swallowed like a pill sometimes. And from that, we move to a word introduced to English by a very famous explorer, one that describes concepts of prohibition and social norms: taboo.
Taboo was introduced into English by none other than Captain James Cook in 1777, directly from the narrative of his voyages to the South Pacific. Its source is the Tongan word taboo.
Taboo, and what does that mean?
It literally means set apart or sacred, often implying something forbidden or restricted. Cook observed this concept during his travels, particularly in Tonga and other Polynesian islands.
And Cook's direct observation really captures the essence of this concept, doesn't it? He wrote, and I quote, "Not one of them would sit down or eat a bit of anything." On expressing my surprise at this, they were all taboo, as they said, which word has a very comprehensive meaning, but in general signifies that a thing is forbidden.
What's remarkable here is the almost unchanged direct adoption of a foreign word brought into English precisely through a specific cultural encounter, through a colonial lens. It then broadly impacted our concept of prohibition and what is socially unacceptable.
And there's a difference in how we say it too, isn't there?
There is. We typically stress the second syllable in English, taboo, but in the native languages it came from, the stress is usually on the first syllable, ta-boo, and it's almost always used adjectively, not as a noun.
That's a cool detail about the pronunciation. And it's still used that way today, isn't it? The dictionary notes its use in linguistic contexts from the 1930s, meaning considered offensive, prohibited by social custom, like taboo terms or topics that are off limits in polite conversation.
Absolutely. So, thanks to Captain Cook and his observations, we have a very clear word for those unspoken rules that govern our behavior and speech.
From Polynesian prohibitions, we journey to a word with a surprisingly pious and, frankly, somewhat judgmental origin, tawdry. Today it means cheap and showy, but its history is anything but.
Tawdry came into use in the early 17th century as a shortening of tawdry lace. And this wasn't just any lace, it was a fine silk lace or ribbon worn as a necklace, particularly popular in the 16th and 17th centuries as a fashionable accessory.
Okay, so it started as something quite fancy, maybe even high fashion for its time, but tawdry today means cheap, gaudy, and poor taste. How did that dramatic shift happen from fine silk to shabby imitation?
Well, tawdry lace itself was a contraction of St. Audrey's lace. Audrey was a later, more common form of the name Etheldreda, who was the Anglo-Saxon patron saint of Ely, where she was an abbess, and she died way back in 679 AD.
Ah, the saint connection. St. Audrey. So what's the fair got to do with this transition to cheapness?
The fair of St. Etheldreda, held annually in Ely, was where these tawdry laces were traditionally sold. But importantly, alongside the original fine silk laces, many cheap imitations and other inexpensive, often brightly colored finery were also sold there.
Ah, I see. So the name got associated with the knockoffs.
Exactly. The original high-quality item became associated with its cheaper, flashier counterparts sold at the same event, eventually taking on their negative connotation of being showy but low quality.
And there's even a rather moralizing folktale woven into this word's history, isn't there?
Huh?
Almost as if to justify the word's negative turn.
Indeed. St. Audrey is said to have died of a throat tumor, which was widely believed at the time to be divine punishment for many showy necklaces she had worn in her youth.
Divine punishment for liking fancy necklaces. That's quite a story.
It's a classic historical anecdote used to impart a moral lesson against vanity. Whether it's true or not, it's certainly stuck to the word.
That's truly amazing. So a word whose modern meaning, cheap and showy, is directly tied to a specific historical event, a revered saint, a bustling fair, and even a moralizing folktale about divine retribution for vanity. What I find so striking here is how much cultural and social history is packed into just one word.
It's a perfect illustration of how our language reflects the values and even superstitions of past eras,
Now let's raise a glass to our next word. Toast. Not the kind you spread butter on for breakfast, but the act of drinking a toast. This common celebratory act has a surprisingly rich and flavorful history.
The practice of drinking a toast originated in the late 17th century. It began with the delightful custom of naming a lady at a banquet whose health, beauty, or virtue the company was requested to drink. It was a formal and often quite poetic tribute.
So it was about honoring a specific person, usually a woman, as the centerpiece of the banquet. But the word toast itself, in this context, has a delightful and unexpected twist that brings us back to actual food, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The delightful twist is the origin of the word toast itself in this context. The idea was that the lady's name, or her charming presence, flavored the drink just like the pieces of spiced toast formerly placed in drinks such as wine.
Wait, they put actual toast in their wine, like bread.
Yes, people would literally put actual pieces of spiced toasted bread into their wine or other drinks like ale or sack, probably to enhance its flavor, maybe soak up sediment, or just add a bit of spice, much like a garnish or an infusion today.
So when you drink a toast to someone today, you're metaphorically saying their presence, their name, or their good health enhances the occasion, just as a piece of spiced bread flavored the wine for banquet-goers centuries ago.
Exactly. That's such a rich social history embedded in a common celebratory act. It really shows how seemingly unrelated concepts can converge in language to create something entirely new and incredibly resonant, reflecting the social customs and even culinary habits of the past.
Of a wonderful illustration, yeah. carrying remnants of those old habits forward, even when we don't put bread in our wine anymore.
Usually. Usually. Okay, let's unpack this next section because it's where we really see the foundational power of Latin. Many English words are not isolated islands, but are part of vast families, sharing a common ancestor.
Right. Understanding these deep Latin roots can unlock profound insights into their meanings and the surprising connections between them. We're going to look at a few examples where a single Latin verb or noun has given rise to a surprising array of English words.
And we start with a very common and versatile Latin root, tenere, which means to hold. This single core concept of holding has spread its influence across so many words, both concrete and abstract, forming a tightly knit linguistic family.
Like tenant, which comes directly from an Old French word also meaning holding. A tenant is quite literally a person holding property. They hold the lease, they hold occupancy. It's simple and direct.
Then there's tenable, which means able to be held or maintained. We often use this in the context of an argument or a position. If an argument is tenable, it can withstand scrutiny, it can hold up under pressure.
And tenacious, a word I really appreciate. It describes someone holding fast or being persistent, like a tenacious grip on a rope, or a tenacious determination to achieve a difficult goal. It's a strong word, evoking that unwavering sense of holding on tightly.
Or tenet. This word literally means he holds in Latin. It refers to a principle or belief that is held to be true by a group, an organization, or an individual. It's a foundational conviction that someone adheres to and maintains.
What about tennis? That seems like a real stretch from to hold. I'm not seeing the connection there initially. How does that fit?
It's not as much of a stretch as you might think. Tennis comes from the Old French tenez, which was a command called out by the server to an opponent. It means take or receive.
Ah, tenez. Like,
Yeah.
here, take this serve.
Exactly. It signified the holding of the serve, or perhaps better, the receiving or taking of the ball to begin play. So it's a command directly related to the action of holding or receiving the ball in play.
That's a great one. And tenor, as in the general tenor of the debate, referring to the overall character or direction. How does hold fit there?
Yes, in that general sense, tenor refers to the content or import of something, the held course or underlying meaning of an argument or discussion. It's the way something holds together, its general drift.
And the musical sense.
Also related. In medieval polyphony, the tenor part traditionally held the main melody or the cantus firmus, the foundational tune around which other parts were composed. So it was literally the holding part.
Okay, that makes sense. And finally, tenure. That seems pretty obvious.
Tenure directly refers to the act or right of holding property or an office for a certain period, or even permanently. For example, academic tenure means holding a permanent position, signifying a secure hold on one's job.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's truly remarkable how this core concept of holding manifests in so many different ways, physical, abstract, and even legal senses, creating this tightly knit linguistic family. You can literally see the hold in each word once you know the root.
It really gives you a powerful tool for understanding new vocabulary. And the same power of a core concept applies to our next family, words of stretching and reaching, all from Latin tender. This root conveys dynamic movement, extension, and often effort.
So Latin tender means to stretch or hold forth. And the first word that immediately comes to mind, reflecting that literal sense, is tension.
Exactly. Tension describes the condition or feeling of being physically strained, directly reflecting the literal sense of being stretched tight. Think of a rope under tension or muscles tensing up.
And the adjective tense, as in a tense atmosphere, also comes from this, meaning something that is stretched tight with anticipation or anxiety.
Right. And tent, that's clearly something stretched, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Early tents were literally made of skins or cloth stretched on poles, often pegs and ropes, to create a shelter. It's a very visual and direct connection to the root tender, capturing the essence of being pulled taut.
How about tender, as in a tender offer for a contract or a bid? That doesn't seem to have much to do with stretching in a physical sense.
You're right, the physical stretching isn't immediately obvious here. This sense, as in an invitation to tender a bid, comes from the notion of formally offering or holding forth a plea or a payment. You are stretching out an offer, putting it forth for consideration.
Okay, that makes sense. You're extending an offer, holding it forth, and tentative, as in a tentative plan or a tentative step. How does stretching fit there?
Tentative comes from Latin tentare, which is a variant of temptere, and both are related to tender. It implies handling or trying something out, often by stretching towards a goal or testing something out to see how it performs. A tentative plan isn't firmly fixed. It's still being stretched out and tested, possibly subject to change.
This raises an important question. What about tangible and tact? They seem a bit different, originating from touch rather than stretch. How do they fit into this family?
That's a great point. Those are indeed from Latin tangere, which means to touch. And tangere is actually intimately related to tender, sharing a common Proto-Indo-European root that connects ideas of touching, reaching, and extending.
So touch and stretch are related way back.
Exactly. So tangible means perceptible by touch. If something is tangible, you can literally reach out and touch it. It has a concrete presence. As for tact, it comes from Latin tactus, meaning touch or sense of touch.
And how did tact become about social skills?
Its evolution from the physical sense of touch to delicacy in dealing with others is a beautiful example of metaphorical stretching. You have a sensitive touch or finesse in social situations, knowing how to handle delicate matters without causing offense.
What's truly fascinating here is observing how the ideas of stretching, reaching, and touching are intimately intertwined in this word family, influencing both physical and abstract meanings. It's almost as if the actions of the human body, reaching, feeling, holding, became a blueprint for these abstract concepts.
It gives you a whole new appreciation for the inherent poetry in our everyday language, doesn't it?
It really does. And now for a truly contrasting pair of Latin roots that sound deceptively similar, terra and terre. One means earth or land, and the other means to frighten. It's amazing how close they sound, yet how diametrically opposed their core meanings are.
Yes. Let's start with words from Latin terra, meaning earth or land. Take terrace, for instance. An early terrace was an open gallery or a platform, often a raised level place for walking. This directly reflects its origin from Latin terra, earth.
Like the tiered rows of houses built on raised ground, or the terraced vineyard stepping down a hillside all about shaped land.
Precisely. And terrain, of course, is a very common one.
Right, the physical features of the land.
Terrain originally referred to a training ground where horses were exercised, a specific piece of land, but it quickly generalized to refer to any tract of country, describing the physical characteristics of a land area, again, directly connected to the earth.
And terrestrial.
Terrestrial originally meant temporal, worldly, indicating things of the earth rather than the heavens or the spiritual realm. Later, its meaning broadened to simply mean of the earth itself, distinguishing, say, terrestrial animals from aquatic ones.
Which naturally leads to territory.
Territory comes from terra, and originally designated the districts surrounding a town or city and under its jurisdiction, especially a Roman or provincial city. The modern notion of defending one's territory, whether it's national borders or a personal space, emerged in the early 20th century, but the root remains firmly in the concept of land.
Okay, so that's the terra family. Pretty straightforward and grounded, literally. But then we have terrere, to frighten, and this is where it gets really interesting, especially with the radical shifts in meaning some of these words underwent. Let's start with terror.
Terror comes directly from Old French terror, straight from Latin terror. That's quite direct. It maintains its original meaning of intense fear. Very straightforward.
And terrible. That word has taken on a few different forms, hasn't it? It can mean utterly bad, but it also used to mean something quite different, more intense.
It has. Terrible in Middle English meant causing terror, which we still see reflected in historical figures like Ivan the Terrible, a ruler whose actions inspired great fear. But its colloquial use really expanded.
Right, like a terrible shame.
Exactly. It became an intensive, meaning a very great or immense shame, or even outrageous, like he's a terrible man for teasing me like that. It still implies something intense or extreme, but not necessarily fear-inducing anymore.
But the real linguistic gymnast in the terror family, for me, is terrific. Because that word underwent a complete and utter reversal. It went from being truly frightening to something incredibly positive.
It's a particularly fascinating case. In the mid-17th century, terrific genuinely meant frightening or awe-inspiring in a terrifying way. John Milton, in his epic poem Paradise Lost, describes the serpent with brazen eyes and hairy mane terrific, truly meaning terrifying.
So it literally meant awesome, in the original sense of inspiring awe and fear. But by the 1930s, somehow, it had undergone a complete semantic flip to become an enthusiastic term meaning marvelous or fantastic.
Right.
What happened there? How does a word make such a dramatic U-turn in meaning?
This is a classic example of semantic bleaching, or maybe hyperbolic exaggeration. When something is intensely bad or frightening, we often use strong words to describe it. Over time, that intensity itself, rather than the negative connotation, becomes the dominant feature.
So the intensely part sticks, but the frightening part fades.
Kind of. Terrific went from intensely frightening to simply intensely striking or intensely good. It's a common linguistic pathway, like how awful used to mean awe-inspiring and now means very bad.
It's truly an aha moment for many of us, I think. You have these two Latin roots that sound so similar, but one gives us the ground beneath our feet, terra, and the other gives us fear, terrere, and then, surprisingly, delight with terrific.
It's a vivid demonstration of how language, though rooted in ancient forms, can twist and turn in unexpected ways. That powerful contrast between words derived from earth and those from fear, and the fascinating semantic flip that terrific underwent, from fearful to fantastic, truly highlights the dynamic and sometimes unpredictable nature of language.
Okay, some words are true shapeshifters, taking on remarkably different meanings or anchoring well-known idioms. Their histories are a testament to language's adaptability, reflecting changes in technology, society, and even human perception. Our next segment is packed with these linguistic chameleons. Let's start with tack, which has not one, not two, but three distinct lives.
Indeed, three different tacks. First, we have tack as a fastener, like a small, sharp-pointed nail or maybe a temporary stitch. This meaning comes from Middle English, describing something that fastens one thing to another. It's directly tied to the action of attaching or securing.
And in the nautical context, that also ties in, doesn't it? Like the tacks of a sailing ship, you tack a ship.
Yes, absolutely. In nautical contexts, tack originally referred to a rope or wire used for holding the corners of lower square sails. The notion of changing direction of a ship, literally tacking, came from the act of changing these lines to brace the yards and turn the ship's head into the wind, thus altering its course. So it's still about fastening or holding a specific course.
Okay, that's tack number one,
Mm-hmm.
the fastener and the nautical maneuver. What about the tack associated with horses, as in putting tack on a horse? That feels different.
It is completely different. That's tack number two, and it shifts entirely. This tack, as in horse riding equipment like saddles, bridles, and stirrups, appeared in the late 18th century. It was originally a dialect word in the general sense of apparatus or equipment, and it's actually a contraction of tackle.
Ah, from tackle. Okay,
Right.
like fishing tackle, but for horses.
Exactly. So when you talk about a tack room where horse equipment is stored, that sense dates from the 1920s and is distinct from the first tack, the fastener one.
So it's not related to the fastener tack at all, despite sounding identical. And then there's a third tack, isn't there? The one that means cheap and shoddy or bad taste, as in, that decor is a bit tacky. Where does that come from?
Yes, this is tack number three, and it's actually a 1980s back formation from the adjective tacky, which appeared much earlier in the early 19th century.
A back formation. Right, for our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly does that mean?
Right, a back formation is when a new word is created by mistakenly removing what looks like a suffix from an existing word, creating a simpler form that didn't actually exist before. So tack, meaning shoddy, was formed by taking what seemed like the Y suffix off tacky.
In tacky itself, where did that come from?
The origin of tacky itself is unknown, but its earliest use was actually as a noun for a horse of little value, like a nag. Then it got applied somewhat offensively to poor white inhabitants in some southern states of the U.S., and from there it extended to its current meaning of shabby, cheap, or in bad taste.
Wow, so from a cheap horse to a social group to bad taste, then back formed into the noun tack. This is a perfect illustration of homonyms with entirely separate and fascinating etymologies. Three distinct words, sounding the same, spelled the same, but with completely different linguistic family trees.
It's pretty incredible how language can produce such coincidences.
From the diverse lives of tack, we move to a word whose meaning was profoundly shaped by an ancient story, transforming from a literal weight to a natural human ability: talent.
When talent first appeared in Old English, it referred to a unit of weight used by ancient nations like the Babylonians, Romans, and Greeks. It also meant a sum of money, coming from Latin talenta, the plural of talentum weight, sum of money. It was a tangible measure of wealth.
So it's literally like a unit of currency, a measure of wealth. But today, talent means a natural aptitude or skill, an inherent gift. How did that dramatic shift happen from physical currency to personal ability?
This is where the biblical allusion comes in. The words used to mean natural aptitude or skill is a figurative use directly derived from the parable of the talents in Matthew 25.14-30.
Ah, the parable. Remind us how that goes.
Right. In the parable, a master, before going on a journey, gives his 3 servants different amounts of silver talents. One servant receives 5, another 2, and the third just 1, and expects them to manage and multiply this wealth. The first 2 servants invest wisely and double their talents.
But the third one just buries his, right? He plays it safe and produces nothing.
Exactly. And the master rebukes the 3rd servant for not using what he was given, for not making the most of his resources. So the lesson became about using your inherent gifts and abilities, not letting them go to waste.
It's amazing how a story from antiquity fundamentally shaped a concept central to modern self-development and potential. That's a powerful connection that most of us probably never even considered. How literature, especially religious texts, can really change how we think about things.
It highlights how a profound moral or religious text can have a pervasive and lasting influence on everyday language, transcending its original context to imbue words with deeper, more abstract meanings.
Now, for a word that presents a linguistic paradox, meaning two almost opposite things, team, how can one word mean both to be full of and to pour or stream? It seems completely contradictory.
It's quite astonishing because they have completely different origins, making them homonyms that just happen to sound alike. They're not related at all.
Okay, so break it down. Let's start with team, meaning full of.
Right. Team, in the sense of to be full of, comes from Old English taimen or taimen, meaning bring forth or produce offspring. Its original senses included give birth to or be pregnant, which logically evolved into be full of or abound.
Like a field teeming with insects or a mind teeming with ideas, it implies an overflowing productive abundance. That makes sense. Giving birth leads to fullness.
Exactly. This sense dates from the late 16th century, but then you have the other team.
Yeah, like teeming with rain, meaning pouring down heavily. Where does that come from?
That's the second team, and it has a different origin entirely. It comes from Middle English and Old Norse tema to empty, which itself is derived from tonkaser, meaning empty.
Wait, from empty, that's the opposite.
It is. Its original sense was specifically to drain liquid from, pour liquid out, leading directly to the current sense flow in a stream, as in it's teeming with rain, or the river teemed into the lake. This sense was originally dialectal and dates from the early 19th century.
That's truly mind-bending. Two words that sound identical, yet relate to diametrically opposed states, being full versus pouring out, derived from words meaning bring forth and empty. It's a testament to the unpredictable and sometimes humorous nature of language.
It's a perfect example of how homonyms can arise from entirely separate etymological paths, creating these fascinating linguistic coincidences that make English both challenging and endlessly interesting. You just have to know which team you mean.
And from paradoxical meanings, we shift to a word that has adapted to fashion and social norms over centuries, showing incredible flexibility for such a simple concept. Thong.
Thong has surprisingly ancient roots. In Old English, it simply meant shoelace, or any narrow strip of leather. You might imagine a primitive sandal tied with thongs, or a simple leather strap for a tool. It was a very practical, utilitarian term for any thin strip of material.
So a very basic descriptive term for a piece of material. But how did it get to its modern uses in clothing, which are often quite specific and, for some, even provocative, like flip-flops or other things?
Well, the word's inherent flexibility for describing a narrow strip allowed it to adapt to more recent applications in clothing contexts. We see it referring to a type of sandal from the 1960s, often with just a narrow strap between the toes, what Americans often call flip-flops.
Okay, sandals.
And then it saw a significant rise in usage for a style of ladies' knickers or swimwear from the 1990s, where the material is minimized to, well, a narrow strip, especially at the back.
So a simple word for a basic strip of material has adapted to very different uses over time, reflecting significant changes in fashion, social norms, and even the amount of clothing considered acceptable in public.
It shows how even the most basic descriptive terms can evolve with society, taking on entirely new connotations. It's a great example of how language, at its fundamental level, is responsive to cultural shifts and emerging trends, particularly in areas like fashion, which are constantly reinventing themselves.
Next, we have a pair of words that shared a common beginning, but then diverged into distinct actions, one retaining its agricultural past, the other generalizing to a much broader meaning. Thrash and thresh. They sound similar, too.
They do, and they're closely related. Both words derive from a Germanic root meaning to tramp with the feet or to tread. Historically, this applied to the vital agricultural task of treading out corn by men or oxen to separate the grain from the husks.
So threshing is literally treading or beating on the grain to separate it. That sounds like hard work.
It was, and the word thresh specifically retained this agricultural context of producing grain by beating or treading. It stayed connected to the farm.
But how did thrash become about generalized beating or striking or even flailing wildly like thrashing around?
Thrash emerged as a variant of thresh. As the method of threshing evolved, especially with the introduction of tools like the flail, a long handle with a shorter, free-swinging stick at the end, it increasingly involved beating with a flail rather than just treading.
Ah, the flail. So more violent striking.
Exactly. So thrash absorbed these more generalized notions of knocking, beating, and striking with force. This also led to its figurative use of beating someone severely or moving violently and uncontrollably, like a fish thrashing on a line.
This is a clear instance of how two words with the same core origin branched out into distinct but related actions, with one retaining the very specific agricultural context and the other generalizing to a broader sense of physical impact, often violent. It's a subtle but significant divergence in their paths.
A nice example of specialization versus generalization in meaning.
Now, let's talk about thread, and an idiom that vividly paints a picture of precariousness, one that has its roots in ancient Greek myth. Hang by a thread.
The Old English noun thread simply referred to something woven, like the individual strands that make up fabric, or the thin line used for sewing. It's a very fundamental concept of a single, slender strand. Basic stuff.
And the idiom hang by a thread, that phrase came into use in the early 16th century. It's directly suggested by the ancient Greek story of Damocles' sword, isn't it? That's a powerful connection.
Precisely. The story goes that Damocles, a flatterer in the court of Dionysius II, the tyrant of Syracuse, expressed admiration for the tyrant's luxurious life. Dionysius, wishing to demonstrate how precarious happiness and power could be for a ruler, invited Damocles to a lavish banquet.
But there was a catch.
A big catch. Over Damocles' seat, he suspended a gleaming sword precariously over his head by a single horsehair. The image of that sword dangling by the thinnest of strands immediately conveyed extreme, imminent danger and fragility.
What a powerful visual that has endured through language for millennia. It's incredible how such a specific ancient narrative continues to inform our modern language and our understanding of risk.
It really is. And we also have other common thread idioms like pick up the thread from the mid-17th century, meaning to resume a narrative or line of thought, or lose the thread from the 1980s, meaning to lose track of an argument or story.
All related to the continuity of a narrative or a continuous line, just like a continuous thread in fabric.
It's a wonderful example of how ancient myth continues to inform modern language, providing vivid imagery for abstract concepts like fragile power or the flow of a story. It truly reminds us of our shared cultural narratives across centuries.
From classical allusions, we shift to a much darker and more specific origin story, one that has been generalized significantly over time. Thug.
Thug entered English in the early 19th century during the period of British colonial rule in India. It first described a member of an organization of professional robbers and assassins in India who strangled their victims. This was a specific, notorious group operating across the Indian subcontinent, often called the Thuggee.
And the word itself has roots in that concealment and deception, doesn't it? A hidden threat. They didn't just attack openly.
No, they often posed as fellow travelers. The word comes from Hindi thag, meaning swindler, deceiver, thief, which is based on the Sanskrit stigati, meaning he covers or conceals. This points to the surreptitious and deceptive nature of their attacks.
So it was originally a highly specific, culturally charged term for a particular kind of criminal organization. But then it broadened significantly, shedding its specific cultural context, didn't it?
It did. It was soon generalized to any violent bully or ruffian, losing its specific historical and geographical association. It became just a general term for a violent criminal or intimidator.
This is a stark example of a culturally specific term becoming a widely used, generalized epithet, highlighting a darker side of word history, and how quickly a word can become a pejorative for a broader, less specific group of people seen as violent or dangerous.
It truly shows how language can absorb and then generalize terms from very specific historical contexts, sometimes, perhaps, losing important nuance along the way.
And speaking of words that started as an insult and then became an identity, let's talk about Tory. That has a fascinating political journey.
Tory appeared in the mid-17th century, and it's likely from Irish tolaid, meaning outlaw or highwayman, maybe specifically pursuer. It originally referred to Irish peasants dispossessed by English settlers who resorted to robbery and banditry to survive during a period of great unrest in Ireland.
So it was a term for rural bandits, really, outlaws. But then it took on a hugely significant and enduring political meaning in Britain. How did that jump happen?
That's right. Around 1679, during the exclusion crisis in England, it was adopted as an abusive nickname for those who opposed the exclusion of the Catholic James, Duke of York, who later became King James II, from the throne.
So the opposition called them Tories as an insult?
Yes, the implication was that these political opponents who supported the hereditary succession even for a Catholic monarch were wild, dangerous, lawless characters, no better than Irish outlaws. It was meant to paint them as rebels against the Protestant establishment.
What's truly fascinating is that this term of abuse, intended as a derogatory label, then stuck and was even embraced. It endured as the name for the English and then British parliamentary party supporting the established order, the monarchy, and the Church of England.
Exactly. It lasted as the primary name until the emergence of the Conservative Party in the 1830s, and even today, many still use Tory informally, sometimes proudly, sometimes critically, to refer to members of that party.
It's a truly fascinating case study of how a term of abuse, born out of political strife, can not only become a lasting, but even a proud political identifier, completely shedding its original negative connotations over time to represent a specific ideology or faction.
Language and politics make strange bedfellows sometimes.
From political labels to a much more intimate and perhaps surprisingly complex journey, the word toilet. Its evolution is unexpectedly long and layered, moving from a simple piece of cloth to a room to a fixture.
Toilet began its life in the mid-16th century. It came from the French toilet, which simply meant cloth or wrapper, actually a diminutive of toile meaning cloth, so its initial meaning was just a small piece of cloth, often used as a covering or wrapper for clothes or articles. Nothing more glamorous than that.
A cloth wrapper for clothes. How on earth did we get from that very mundane domestic item to the modern lavatory or bathroom fixture? That seems like an enormous leap.
This is where the evolution unfolds in fascinating incremental layers. In the 17th century, the toilet came to describe a cloth cover for a dressing table, where one would prepare for the day, sit down to do hair and makeup.
Okay, the cloth on the dressing table. Still a cloth.
Yes. Then, by extension, it referred to the articles used on that dressing. Table, combs, brushes, perfumes, cosmetics, the whole set of items for grooming. And then, importantly, the process of dressing and grooming oneself became known as making one's toilet.
So making one's toilet used to mean getting dressed, doing your hair, applying makeup, essentially preparing oneself, like one's toilet.
Exactly. From there, it further evolved to encompass the process of washing oneself or one's ablutions as part of that preparation. Then, in the 19th century, a toilet also referred to a dressing room or a private room where one could attend to personal grooming and washing a toilet room.
And finally, the fixture.
And finally, in the early 20th century, particularly in the US, if that dressing room or toilet room had washing and waste disposal facilities, the word extended to mean a lavatory or a bathroom, and eventually the porcelain fixture itself.
The transformation from a simple piece of cloth to the modern bathroom fixture is one of the most surprising and often amusing linguistic journeys I've heard. You really have to trace each step to see how it happened.
It speaks volumes about the historical evolution of personal hygiene, privacy, and domestic spaces. It perfectly demonstrates how a word can incrementally expand its semantic field, each new meaning building on the last, until the original sense is almost completely obscured.
A real linguistic surprise for most people today, I bet. Okay, and from the intimate space of the toilet, we shift to a very modern urban planning concept that many of us encounter every day, traffic calming.
Right. The word traffic itself dates from the early 16th century, referring broadly to the commercial transportation of merchandise or passengers, as in trade or commerce moving back and forth.
So movement of goods and people.
Yes. The more specific sense of vehicles moving on a highway came later, in the early 19th century, as road travel became more commonplace and, well, congested.
And then in the 1980s, we got traffic calming. This is a relatively new compound, but it's not English in origin, is it? It feels like a direct translation, like something borrowed.
You're right, it is. Traffic calming is a direct translation of German Verkehrsberuhigung, Verkehr meaning traffic, and Beruhigung meaning calming or tranquilizing.
Verkehrsberuhigung, okay. And what does it describe?
It describes the deliberate slowing of traffic by measures such as road humps or speed bumps, as we often call them chicanes, narrower streets, raised intersections, and other street design elements aimed at making roads safer for pedestrians and cyclists by reducing vehicle speed and volume.
This shows how modern urban planning concepts can directly influence the adoption of new vocabulary, sometimes straight from other languages, particularly when a concept originates elsewhere and is then imported. It's a very practical, functional borrowing.
It filled a specific need in English urban planning discourse. It's a good illustration of how language adapts to new societal needs and specialized knowledge, and how concepts born in one culture can be adopted globally through direct translation, enriching the target language's vocabulary.
Let's delve into a truly ancient word with a fascinating, unexplained mystery at its core, one that has puzzled linguists for centuries.
Tragedy.
Tragedy came into English in Middle English via Latin from Greek tragödia, and here's the intriguing part that leads to the mystery. It's apparently from Trago's goat and Diderot's song Ode, so literally a goat song.
The goat song. That's such a bizarre and seemingly disconnected origin for a word that describes profound suffering, a dramatic, catastrophic event, or a play with an unhappy ending. It doesn't make immediate sense.
No, it doesn't, and the dictionary explicitly states that the reason remains unexplained, which I find incredibly satisfying in its honesty. We just don't know for sure.
So there are theories, but nothing concrete. Exactly. While theories exist, perhaps it relates to ancient Greek dramatic festivals where a goat was the prize, or a goat was sacrificed as part of the ritual, or maybe the chorus members were dressed as satyrs who were half-goat beings associated with Dionysus. The precise, definitive connection between a goat song and the dramatic genre of tragedy remains elusive and debated.
And that's a truly provocative thought, isn't it? That even with all our dictionaries and linguistic scholarship, some word origins just remain a puzzle, reminding us that language is an incredibly old, living, breathing thing with forgotten chapters and obscure beginnings.
It reminds you that there's always more to discover, or perhaps things that can never be fully known, even in the words we use every day. A little mystery.
Our final deep dive in this section unveils a profound and surprising connection between painful labor and what we now consider a leisure pursuit, the word travel.
Travel is actually a variant of the Middle English word travail, and travail has a very intense, even grim origin story. It comes via Old French from medieval Latin trepalium.
And tropalium, that sounds quite dark, almost like a punishment. What was that?
It might have been, and for good reason. Trepalium might come from tres 3 and palis stake, possibly implying a torture device with 3 sticks used for punishment. Or perhaps it was a framework used for securing animals, like horses or oxen, while shoeing them or treating them, which would certainly involve great effort and struggle.
So its initial sense was literally engage in painful effort, linking travail directly to arduous labor, suffering, or intense exertion, like hard, painful work.
Exactly. Think of the intense effort and pain of childbirth, which is still sometimes called travail in some contexts, particularly in medical language. It implies serious effort and difficulty.
But then how did we get to travel, meaning taking a trip, often for pleasure?
Well, the sense make a journey arose relatively early, becoming distinct from travail for hard work. It seems to have evolved from the immense difficulty and effort of historical travel, which, before modern transportation, was often arduous, uncomfortable, and even dangerous, to simply the act of making a journey itself. The hardship was originally implied in the word.
That's truly amazing. The transition from intense suffering or painful labor to the act of leisure travel today, often associated with relaxation and enjoyment, is such a profound semantic shift. We've even adapted it further with modern conveniences like the travelator from the 1950s.
Right, based on travel and influenced by escalator, which literally makes travel even easier and less effortful, taking the travail right out of it.
It's an incredible journey for a word. What I find so striking here is truly seeing the profound and surprising connection between the effort, even suffering, inherent in travail, and the recreational pursuit of travel today. It reminds us that what seems effortless or enjoyable today once involved genuine hardship and significant effort.
Language holds on to those ghosts sometimes.
Okay, now we enter our final section, full of quirks, linguistic blends, and modern adaptations. These are the words that stand out for their unexpected twists, their surprising formations, or their fascinating connections to pop culture. And the first one is a classic myth debunker that many people get wrong. Teetotal.
Ah, teetotal. Many people assume it's linked to tea, Perhaps because tea is a non-alcoholic beverage and often associated with temperance movements. You hear that a lot.
Yeah, it seems logical, right?
Yeah.
But that's a very common misconception, what linguists call a folk etymology.
Exactly. A folk etymology is when people create a more intuitive but often incorrect origin for a word, usually based on how it sounds, or to make sense of something they don't fully understand. It sounds like teetotal, so people assume tea is involved.
So if it's not about tea, what's the real story? Where does teetotal actually come
In
from?
the case of teetotal, the truth is it's an emphatic extension achieved by reproducing the first letter of the word total. It was apparently first used by a worker named Richard Turner from Preston, England.
Richard Turner. What did he say?
In an 1833 speech advocating for temperance, he urged total abstinence from all alcohol, beer, wine, everything, rather than just abstinence from spirits, which was advocated by some early temperance movements. He reportedly emphasized teetotal, stammering or deliberately repeating the T to make it absolutely clear he meant total abstinence.
Teetotal. So it's about being totally abstinent, not about drinking tea. That's a satisfying moment of correcting a widely held linguistic myth. It's amazing how these linguistic misunderstandings can take root and propagate over time.
It really is. It shows how a quirk of pronunciation or an emphatic delivery can create a new word and, over time, obscure its true origin with a more intuitive but incorrect one that seems to make more sense to people.
From quirks to modern marvels, the incredible reach of the Greek prefix tele and the fascinating birth of the transistor.
The Greek prefix tele literally means far off or at a distance, and it's incredibly versatile, hugely productive in English. We see it in so many words related to communication or action over distance. Telekinesis, meaning action at a distance. Telemeter, a device operating over long distances.
Telephone, telegraph.
Exactly. And it's also used as an abbreviation, like in telescene, transferring film to video, or telemarketing, communicating or acting far off.
And of course, the most direct examples are telescope, literally looking at a distance, and television, which is vision at a distance. Simple, powerful, and descriptive, clearly conveying the idea of overcoming distance.
What's truly fascinating is how language then takes these established patterns to create entirely new words for emerging technologies, reflecting human ingenuity. Take transistor, for instance, coined in the 1940s, a groundbreaking electronic component that changed everything.
That sounds like a blend, doesn't it? Like two words merged together, maybe transfer something.
You got it. It is. Transistor is a clever linguistic blend of transfer and resistor. It was influenced by the pattern of existing words in electronics, like varistor, which is a varying resistor.
So the scientists deliberately blended those words.
Yes, the scientists and engineers at Bell Labs who developed this technology deliberately crafted a name that both captured its function, transferring electrical signals across a resistor, effectively amplifying them, while also sounding like an existing electronic component. It was a very conscious coinage.
This perfectly illustrates the powerful generative nature of prefixes and blending, allowing us to coin new words to describe new technologies and concepts, often by creatively combining existing parts. It's a snapshot of language adapting in real time to innovation.
It's a testament to the ingenuity of language users, coining terms that are both descriptive and memorable for groundbreaking inventions that reshape our world.
Next, we have a word that truly is a treasure house of words itself, but its meaning was solidified by one particular literary work.
Thesaurus. Thesauruses came into English in the late 16th century, directly from the Greek thesauros, which literally means storehouse or treasure. So, etymologically, a thesaurus is a treasure house for words.
That's a beautiful image. What was its original scope then, if it was a storehouse of knowledge? Was it always about synonyms?
No, not originally. Its original sense was quite broad. It could refer to any dictionary or encyclopedia, a comprehensive collection of knowledge or terms, not specifically synonyms, just a treasury of information.
So how did its meaning narrow down so precisely to what we think of as a thesaurus today, a book primarily containing synonyms and antonyms? It must have been a significant event.
It was one specific book. Its meaning narrowed to the current specific sense, a word treasury, specifically for synonyms and related concepts, due to the immense and lasting influence of Peter Mark Roget's Thesaurus of English Words and Phrases, which was first published in 1852.
Roget's Thesaurus, of course.
That single book, designed to help writers express themselves more precisely by grouping words by ideas, almost single-handedly cemented the modern definition of thesaurus in the public consciousness. Its success was huge.
That's incredible how one person's dedicated work and compiling a specific type of dictionary can concretely shape the meaning and usage of a word for generations. It's a powerful reminder that language is often shaped by the people who use it and the tools they create to manage it.
It vividly demonstrates how intellectual endeavors and popular publications can directly influence the semantic trajectory of a word, giving it a very specific and widely adopted meaning that might not have been its original intent.
And from books to brains, specifically institutional brains,
Mm.
think tank, a relatively modern coinage that captures a very specific kind of organization.
Think tank is indeed a relatively recent compound appearing in the 1950s. It describes a research organization providing advice on national problems, often staffed by experts from various fields engaged in interdisciplinary research and policy analysis.
So literally a tank or container for thinking. I imagine this term really took off during the Cold War era with the heightened need for concentrated intellectual power to address complex national security and global policy issues. It feels very much a product of that time.
Exactly. The intense geopolitical climate, the space race, the nuclear arms race, the need for concentrated expertise and strategic thought in that period likely spurred the creation and rapid adoption of this term. It was needed.
It reflects how specialized institutional terms can quickly enter broader public discourse, especially when they capture a new form of organization or a critical activity.
It's a great example of language creating new terms for new types of institutions that emerge to meet complex societal challenges.
And from institutional thinking, we transition to a truly gruesome origin story for a very common word, toady. This one is memorable.
Toady, which appeared in the early 19th century, is said to be a contraction of toad eater.
A toad eater. That sounds incredibly unpleasant and quite literally stomach-churning. What on earth was a toad eater? Please tell me they didn't actually eat toads.
Oh, they apparently did. It was indeed. A toad eater was a charlatan's assistant, a kind of sidekick who would literally eat toads, or pretend to, as part of the charlatan's street performance.
Why?
Because toads were widely regarded as poisonous in those days. The assistant's miraculous survival after consuming them was attributed to the supposed efficacy of the charlatan's remedy or antidote, which he would then eagerly sell to a gullible audience.
That is just utterly wild and revolting. So the assistant was performing this disgusting, dangerous, and rather nauseating act, quite literally to make the charlatan look good, to prove his magical remedies.
Precisely, swallowing the poison to show how good the master's cure was. From this little, gruesome, and demeaning act, the term was then applied figuratively to a sycophant or flatterer, someone who performs demeaning, unpleasant, or humiliating acts for another's favor, seeking to curry their approval or gain some advantage, much like the toad eater sought to make his master look impressive.
That's a truly bizarre and specific historical practice, giving rise to a common word for obsequious, fawning behavior. It's shockingly literal in its origins, an absolutely revolting anecdote, but a hilariously memorable etymology.
It certainly adds a vivid, if somewhat unsettling, image to the act of sucking up, doesn't it?
And from gruesome to playful, then perhaps a little judgmental, showing how society's views can influence word formation. Toy boy.
The word toy itself, in late Middle English, had broader meanings than just children's playthings. It could refer to a funny story or remark, an antic or trick, or even frivolous entertainment, so it always carried a sense of something light, perhaps not serious, even whimsical or trivial.
So toy always carried that sense of something light, not meant to be taken too seriously, sometimes even a bit frivolous. How did that playful, slightly dismissive connotation translate to toy boy?
Toy boy emerged as a modern colloquial term in the 1980s, specifically for the young male lover of an older woman. It applies that existing sense of toy, something for amusement, perhaps seen as not entirely serious to a person within that specific relationship dynamic.
This is a fascinating example of how a word primarily associated with inanimate playthings can evolve into a human descriptor, and often one loaded with societal judgment or assumptions. It directly reflects shifts in social dynamics and, perhaps, the way such relationships are sometimes portrayed in media.
As a form of amusement or light entertainment for the older partner, lacking depth or seriousness, that's often the implication, fair or not, it definitely highlights how new societal dynamics and cultural discussions directly influence the formation of new words, sometimes taking existing terms and applying them in entirely new and often loaded contexts.
Reflecting a shift in social norms, definitely. And speaking of pop culture phenomena, our final word for today, trek, brings us to a journey that captured the imaginations of millions and spawned a global fandom.
Trekkie. The word trek itself, which came into English in the mid-19th century, has a very specific geographical and historical origin. It comes from South African Dutch trek, meaning pull or travel, and referred specifically to an arduous journey by ox wagon, particularly the Great Trek of the Boers in South African history during the 1830s and 40s.
So it meant a long, difficult, and often arduous journey, a migration, really. But then it got completely hijacked by science fiction fans in a truly unique way.
Indeed. The term Trekkie, or sometimes Trekker, emerged in the 1970s and was popularized to describe a devotee of the U.S. science fiction television program Star Trek. It's a blend of Trek from the show's title and the informal suffix ie or indicating a person associated with it.
That's a vivid example of a word from a very specific geographical and historical context. The Boer Trek becoming the basis for a global pop culture fandom, creating an entirely new social identifier related to exploring strange new worlds.
It truly highlights the pervasive influence of media on language, creating new linguistic categories and communities out of existing words. It's a fantastic demonstration of how words can jump from one domain to an entirely different one, becoming cultural markers and evolving their meaning far beyond their original scope, fueled by the power of shared cultural experiences.
Well, we've journeyed through just a fraction of the incredible stories hidden within the words that start with T. From ancient Roman weights to Persian headdresses, from Baghdad silk to French anti-alcohol movements, each word is like a tiny time capsule of history, culture, and human ingenuity, patiently waiting for us to uncover its secrets.
Our deep dive today, we hope, has given you not just a list of definitions, but maybe a renewed appreciation for the dynamism of language itself. We hope it's equipped you to be more discerning and certainly more delighted in your daily encounters with words. There's so much history under the surface.
So the next time you find yourself using an everyday word, perhaps one we didn't even mention today, take a moment. Pause. What forgotten histories or surprising transformations might it hold? What other stories are just waiting for you to uncover them, simply by asking, where did that word come from?
You might be amazed at the deep dive waiting just beneath the surface of your own vocabulary.